Hello and welcome to the Business Today show. I'm Udayan Mukherjee. These are difficult days for Indian digital companies, startups particularly, because while once raising hundreds of millions of dollars was just about a month's game, the whole landscape of funding has changed. Now there is a pronounced drought in venture capital and private equity funding, and Indian digital companies are struggling. Not a week goes by without news of thousands of layoffs in some of these companies. But this predicament does not apply to all companies. For example, Zoho Corp is one of these companies who've never raised venture capital or private equity capital and therefore is not struggling or reeling like some of its counterparts in the digital universe. In fact, so much so that I like to call the founder of Zoho the ultimate bootstrap billionaire, because he's really a model of bootstrapping in that world. So it's wonderful to welcome Sridhar Vembu, who's the co-founder and CEO of Zoho Corp, to the Business Today show. Sridhar, good to see you in today, and thank you very much for joining in.
Thank you for having me on stage.
You know, in my introduction, I was just outlining how difficult it has become for the digital universe. But you've always stayed away from venture capital funding and private equity funding, much before the difficult times arrived. Why is it? I mean, was it an article of faith for you that you will build your company up from scratch without recourse to external capital? What made you stay away?
Yeah, so this from early days, 25 years, 27 years now. I wanted to avoid venture capital because I wanted to build a company for the long haul with really a focus on our freedom to be ourselves, really. That was the reason. There wasn't any very deep reason, but I felt that if we took venture capital, we would have to provide an exit eventually, which would have to be either an acquisition, in which case we lose our independence, or go public, in which case, again, we would lose our independence, so execution. So I felt that being private would give us the freedom, and what do I mean by the freedom? Freedom to invest in very long-term R&D. A lot of the things we do are focused on the long term. And for example, there are products that we invested 12, 13 years ago, which are paying off now, which is very difficult to do when you have venture capital or even public markets breathing down your neck, because quarter to quarter profitability become very important. So that's why we decided to essentially stay private indefinitely, which can only be possible if we don't raise external money.
No, I take your point, and it's a very important point that you make. But was it also in a way to do with the fact that you foresaw that reliance on external capital might actually warp the business model of your company in a way that you'll not be able to focus on profitability on an annual basis to drive the company forward, which is what a lot of digital companies seem to be trapped in today? Did you foresee that problem too?
Yeah, it was clear, even in 99, 2000, there was a dot-com bubble, which was a lot of companies that raised huge rounds of money then. Those are not huge rounds now. Then fell by the wayside in 2001, 2, and then there was a big drought in VC funding for a while. That was a good lesson watching this in real time then, and it also emphasized that if you raise money, you're forced to spend it, and you lose profitability. And then when you really, when the winter arrives, money is no longer available and you're losing money. And so we decided, we will do it profitably. And that necessarily meant growth would be slower, but it's steadier. And we have actually grown steadily over the last 25 years now. We've crossed $1 billion in revenue, and we are now accelerating. The reason for the acceleration is now we have the depth and breadth of product portfolio, which we could not have built up if we had raised money, because that long-term investment was not possible. And so you are, in a sense, what venture capital forces it to grow faster by investing more heavily in sales and marketing as opposed to R&D. And sales and marketing will give you an immediate boost in growth. But if you don't invest enough in R&D, you don't have long-term growth. So that's the trade-off we were able to make: long-term growth versus more immediate growth.
Yeah, speaking of profitability, Sridhar, how profitable is Zoho Corp? Because you're a private company, there's not so much information in the public domain. I mean, we know that you've crossed the milestone of $1 billion in revenues, and it's a significant milestone. But on that $1 billion revenue, could you give us some sense of what your profitability metrics are like?
Yeah, we file our report every year with the Indian government, and then we pay taxes. Our taxes would give you an idea of the profitability. Last year we paid over 600 plus crores in taxes, so that gives you an idea. And so we've been consistently profitable for several years now, decades, and that also is steadily growing. But we are reinvesting that profit back into R&D, back into our expansion, data centers, all of that, and geographic expansion around the world, all of that.
Now, this desire to stay private, does it extend to public shareholders as well? I'm not talking about venture capital or any institutional kind of shareholding like private equity. But is there a desire to do an IPO and to share Zoho's success with public shareholders at large at any stage?
No, I actually prefer to stay private because even public companies are subject to that quarter-to-quarter pressure still. And I also, as an example, there is 3-4 years ago this happened, where profit declined 50%. And it declined simply because we invested more heavily in R&D that time and more heavily in data center expansion, all that. And somebody, actually a journalist, pointed this out because they got this from the government filings that your profit declined. And I said, well, yeah, but I didn't pay attention to it because our concern is now we are investing in a lot of areas of growth. I couldn't be so nonchalant if I were a public company CEO. I will have to defend this. Why we are doing this at the expense of profitability? Today, we just do it if there is a good opportunity to invest.
But you don't see the need for augmenting, or you don't consider the valuation of your company that important then, or even if only as a currency for things like stock options, etc. I'm not even sure what the valuation of Zoho now. I mean, you have some peers like HubSpot, which lend itself to some kind of market value or market cap comparisons. But could you share with us, A, what your likely valuation today is, and whether valuation is important in your eyes at all?
I truly don't care about valuation. I have not actually paid attention to that at all. The press may write about the valuation, but I have never computed it. I haven't cared about it. What matters is, do we have enough resources to invest in the areas we are investing in, all the R&D we are investing in? Are we growing steadily? And do those products come to fruition, long-term R&D we are investing in? Do we keep our employees happy? Do we take care of them well? Do we keep our customers happy? Those are the concerns I have. And that's I consider that a luxury we can afford because we are private. And essentially I get to ignore our shareholders, which is something that most CEOs would love to do, but they cannot do, that I can afford to do. And if I go public, I cannot do this. There will be I'll have to report to shareholders every quarter, and that's not something I want to take on that burden. So that's why we are this way. And the valuation is something that I've never paid attention. I know, see, again, this is the wrong way to think. I mean, if I said this as a venture capital company or a public company, I would not have my job very long. But that's why we stay private.
Yeah, you have the luxury of doing that. But do you think that is really the core of, or one of the core problems that is afflicting the digital universe in India today, that they put the cart before the horse, they thought of valuations before growing the business, and which is why all these problems are coming up with these newly coined unicorns over the last few months?
Absolutely. I mean, take the word unicorn itself. That's considered $1 billion in valuation. But as we saw, that valuation could come and go easily, could evaporate. I mean, we saw FTX, a company worth what, 32 billion, vanish into zero. Just the last couple of weeks, the crypto trading company, FTX. So what was, it was 32 billion a month ago and zero now. So I don't consider these valuations all that meaningful. And in any event, what happened when you make valuation the real metric, when there is a stock market bubble, as it happened in the last year or so, the last few years, you got extremely hyperinflated valuations, and which has started driving, that became the principal objective for companies, it severely distorts your decision making. You're not running the company to benefit customers or even employees for that matter. Even though you'll argue that employees have stock option, they benefit from the valuation. Well, they don't. You have lock-up periods and whatnot. So employees cannot sell these shares easily. Even companies that went public with a 6-month lock-up period, there wasn't enough window of opportunity to sell at those inflated prices. Prices came down quite a bit. So in a sense, these valuation obsession cost companies dearly in terms of market execution, in terms of R&D execution, all of that. And this is the cost of bubbles. Bubbles always cause economic damage long term. And we saw this in the startup sector. Resources got sucked into companies whose only focus was to inflate the paper valuations. FTX is a classic example of that. They sucked in a lot of resources in terms of R&D talent, people, and marketing, all of that, and now it's at zero. And this, to a lesser extent, reflected across the landscape, which is also the reason, I wanted to stay away from these bubbles. I wanted to stay away from the focus on valuation. That's also a reason why we stay private.
You speak about employees and the cost to employees, Sridhar, and it is very apparent now what's going on with so many thousands of employees being laid off practically every week or month from the digital universe. Do you see this becoming even more painful because of the flaw in the business model or flaws in the business model that you just alluded to?
Unfortunately, it is the bubble itself, right? That is caused this, where there was inflated valuations that attracted more and more money into the sector. Companies went on hiring sprees, massively overhired, and now inevitably when the bubble turned and it became a crash bust, then people lose their jobs. So it is what was unsustainable became more clear. And I am just, it's just sad to watch this spectacle, but it had happened twice before. It had happened in the 2001 2 bust, and then it again happened in the 2008-9. And all of those times, the same exact thing repeated, where too much money chased, inflated valuations, and there was a big crash, and then job losses, all of that. This time, the bubble appeared to be even bigger, which is why the bust seems even worse. And I am afraid that the pain has only started. I think that this would get worse before it gets better in the whole tech sector.
You see companies going belly up, being unable to raise venture capital or private equity funding. It may not be restricted to just belt tightening. It could be even more severe than that.
If you look at history as a guide, the best way we can predict the future is to look at the past episodes where similar stuff happened. I remember this very distinctly. In Silicon Valley, we were exposed to this whole optical networking sector. That's where we were serving in 99, 2000, that time. Our primary business was selling software to optical networking companies. There were like 400, 500 such companies in the US at that time. Silicon Valley alone would have maybe 300 such companies. 2 years later, just in 2000, all these companies were there, and two years later, 95% of companies had shut down. Today, almost only 1 or 2 of them survive. And what is interesting about that is the optical revolution really happened. I'm in a remote village and I have dual fiber optic links to my home here. So I have 2 fiber optic lines coming in. And in 2000, this was unimaginable that this would happen on a worldwide basis. Even remote villages in India would have fiber optic connection. So the revolution actually happened. And similarly, wireless revolution happened. We have 4G now, 5G coming up soon, and wireless everywhere. Everybody has a smartphone in their pocket, which was unimaginable again in 2000. So the premise of the technology revolution was correct. Yet the companies that were betting on it, the venture capital that went into all this, that eventually that went bust. This again, Warren Buffett said, you had the sector flourished long term, but the companies that overextended themselves did not, and which proved to be the vast majority of companies. So, and this is the necessary way this happens always in these booms and busts. The overall premise could be correct, the digital transformation, all of that would come true, but that doesn't mean all of the investment dollars that bet on the premise would get actually a return. And I offer the optical networking as a classic example which we were frontally exposed to.
And how important is the Indian market for Zoho Corp, Sridhar? Because, a lot of your clients, of course, are spread across the world. Many are in America. But just core Indian corporations using your products, how big a market would you say that could be?
Yeah, right now India is number 3 in terms of market share for us. And in 10 years, it gone from being barely in the top 10 to now number 3. So that just tells you how fast we have grown in India in the last 10 years. In fact, until about 2012, we hardly had any market in India. India was a production base, but we were not actually much of a presence in India in terms of market customers. And today it's number 3, and it's also the fastest growing market by far. And I see that we would become number 2 market for us worldwide in the next 3 to 5 years. And it could even be the number 1 market based on current trends over the next 10 years. And that would still mean, we would still get the majority of revenue from abroad. But by the 3rd biggest market today is India. It would be the 2nd biggest in maybe 3 to 5 years, and the biggest market for us in 10 years. That's how important India is to us. And it also reflects the growth of the broader economy.
And which part of your business? Sorry, please go ahead.
Our growth reflects the broader growth in the Indian economy. We have gone to from 25 years ago, we were a 350 billion economy. Now it's 10 times bigger, 3.5 trillion economy. And that could become, I can easily see the pathway to 10 to 20 trillion economy in the next 10 to 15 years.
Let me ask you a question on the human resource side, because of your work with Zoho University, where you take in people without fancy degrees, college degrees. How do you see this problem of employable graduates from India for the technology sector? Because today there seems to be a big scramble for talent, which is why probably issues like moonlighting are coming to the fore. How do you see this problem, the way around this problem?
We have always taken a work task as skill, capability, building, talent creation. A lot of companies, look at talent as something as a given that you get from the market. We see, particularly in the Indian context, the challenge is one of creating and nurturing the talent. It's a mindset shift that we are in the talent creation business, we are in the talent nurturing business, not merely just talent acquisition business. So we don't assume that there's ready-made talent available in the market, we just acquire. We go and actively seek to create and nurture the talent. That approach has been true for over nearly our entire existence as a company. That has served us really well. In fact, that is critical for both our growth as well as our rural expansion, as well as our employee loyalty. All 3 are driven by the fact that we invest in talent, we create and nurture the talent, and that fueled our growth as a company. And it has actually allowed us to expand by expanding into rural areas with an abundance of latent talent. Talent that is intrinsically there, but someone has to go and nurture it and then bring it out. And that also promotes employee loyalty, because when you invest in people, they tend to be loyal. So all of that has been helped by this our policy of how we look at talent.
Any thoughts on this moonlighting controversy, or do you have a specific stance on it?
We actually don't. It really isn't a problem for us. I haven't really much. This didn't arise in the company at all. But really the hard problem in defining all this. If somebody is, for example, a really good software engineer, and they run a YouTube channel on the side for cooking, or YouTube channel focused on organic farming or some such thing. And I joke that I'm on Twitter talking about macroeconomics. Does that count as moonlighting? Because what is my interest in macroeconomics, right? So it's very difficult to define these things, right? And I read up on a lot about macroeconomics. It informs my work as the CEO of this company, but it's well beyond that. I talk about rural development, topics like that. So that's why I think it's really difficult to define this. Our own policy in Zoho is use your common sense. There are some clear, obvious lines. If you're doing some work and then you're doing the same exact work for a competitor and you're getting paid for it, all of that, clearly that would be a violation of trust even. And so that's why it's just use your common sense. That's the policy.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Sridhar, because you come from fairly modest roots. I mean, you've had a fairly middle-class upbringing. You grew up in a household where your father was a stenographer in the Madras High Court. I mean, that kind of upbringing, I mean, has it gone a long way in shaping the person that you are at the core?
Absolutely. My value systems come from my parents. To this day, my father just turned 80 this last week, and he would refuse any kind of a big celebration of it. I mean, we just went to a temple, conducted a humble puja in a local temple. So that's the type of person my father is and my parents are, and they still retain the exact life they've had well before all of this success, all of that happened. And that is a role model for me. I look at myself much like my father, and I think if it's okay for him to live a humble life, why shouldn't I enjoy the same kind of life he does, which is a very modest life? And that was drilled into our head from childhood. My parents never took on debt, or my father's income was modest, but we never took on debt. As a result, those values stayed with us, and not just with me, all my siblings. I'm blessed, truly blessed to have them as parents, because those value system is what has helped me, during all my this thing, in terms of staying humble, staying close to our roots, and not getting, hyper over excited about wealth itself. To me, wealth only, I separate the wealth from a person. I mean, it's not mine in a sense. It allows us to do some good for our society. And I live in a rural area, and on a daily basis, I may come across a lot of causes that I want to support. And I'm blessed that the wealth allows us to do that. But beyond that, I mean, I'm not really personally interested in wealth, because it doesn't make any sense. And the same thing, this is directly from my parents. I would want to be a true son of my parents, and which means that I really cannot be flashily displaying wealth. Then I would cease to be, their son in a way, in a core way. So that's why I want to live up to their ideal.
Mm-hmm. Would you go as far as to say that when you see businessmen with this almost a crude kind of display of wealth, building huge mansions, buying ships and yachts, and this public display of wealth, do you find it distasteful too?
I don't really want to comment on other people. It's not their business what people want to do with their money. But I'll say there is an ancient philosophy in our land, our value system in our land, which advises moderation in all things. This is not new. This is thousands of year old wisdom in our land. Moderation in all things. So that's and that helps all of us, because we are, in a sense, we are custodians of wealth. Our father of the nation, Gandhiji, said this. So he was never a socialist, right, Gandhiji. But he also said, capitalism, you are a trustee, custodian of wealth. That's how I see it. We have all this wealth, our employees, our society helped create it. I'm merely a custodian. Our family, they're all custodians of it. And we get to direct it to good causes. That's how I see it. And an extreme personal display of wealth, at least from my upbringing, I find it, personally, I cannot do it. That's all.
Sridhar, congratulations on your success at Zoho, and I think there's a lot that the Indian digital universe can learn from you and your company. But thank you very much for your time, and I wish you great success in the years ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Namaste again.